can be resolved. If during the course of the meeting any member of the committee is having connection issues, then there will be a short adjournment of up to 5 minutes to determine whether the connection issues can be resolved. If following the adjournment the connection issues cannot be resolved, then providing the meeting remains quorate, then it will continue. It will be deemed that the member with connection issues has left the meeting and will no longer be able to participate. For all attendees, please switch off your microphones and cameras. For members of the committee, your microphones and cameras should be switched off unless you are speaking. If you wish to speak during the meeting, please use the raise hand function and wait for me to ask you to speak. The voting during virtual meetings will use the raise hand function. I will call on the Democratic Services Officer to confirm the vote. Are there any questions before we move on to the formal agenda?
No, Chair.
Okay, I will now ask our Democratic Services Officer to confirm the attendees at this meeting. This will be for members of the committee only. When your name is called out, please confirm your attendance.
Thank you, Chair. I will start with the Vice Chairman, John Eaves.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Councillor Cranham.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor McQueen.
Present, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Mistry.
Present, Veronica.
Thank you. Councillor Pacey-Day.
Present.
Thank you. That's everyone is present, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Veronica. Okay, let's move on to the formal agenda then. So item 1, can I ask if you're happy to confirm the minutes of our previous meeting on the 28th of January 2020. And for this item, I'll just take silence as affirmation that you're content with the minutes. Okay, thank you, everybody. Item number 2, Veronica, are there any apologies for absence tonight?
There are no apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so item 3 on the agenda, declarations of interest. So I'd ask you to advise if there are any declarations in respect of, and I'll go through them in order, non-pecuniary interests as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for Councillors, pecuniary interests as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for Councillors, notice under Section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 4 of the agenda then, which I believe is the external audit plan. So Grant or James, is this over to you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's Grant Patterson here from Grant Thornton, the Council's engagement lead. And I will be joined tonight by James McClarnon, who is the audit manager. You've got 3/4 papers on the agenda for us today, basically the audit plan and an addendum, an audit informative risk assessment and a progress report. I'm going to take you through the plan and then James will take you through the informative risk assessment and audit progress report.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of your pack, just to make sure we are on the same page, I'm looking at page 9 out of 238 in the pack, which is in the page entitled Introduction and Headlines on our Audit Plan. And hopefully that's the same page that everybody is on. And I'll talk mainly to this one, but I will then go a bit further through the plan because this does provide a summary of where we are. The plan itself was actually produced, I suppose, at a moment in time, and it was produced back in February for the March Audit Committee. So we've not formally updated the plan into June, but there is an addendum to that. And the plan outlines our views of the key risks that we'll need to address in this year's audit. For those members of the committee that have been on it for a number of years, there's no significant change to the risk we identified originally. So looking at those significant risks for the audit, and those are the ones where we will undertake additional audit procedures. They are primarily related to those elements of the accounts that are large estimates, or where under auditing standards we have a presumed risk. So one of the key ones is evaluation of the pension fund net liability, and clearly there are estimates involved in that. The council or the pension fund will take advice from actuaries, and therefore, given the estimation issues around the net pension fund liability, we consider that to be a significant risk or potential for material misstatement. And in a similar way, valuation of property, plant and equipment. Again, this is an estimate at the year end of the balance sheet, and the council will be using valuation experts to help it in the creation of those estimates. So given the potential uncertainty on that, and I will explore that a little bit further in relation to COVID-19, we had already highlighted that as a significant risk. The other risks we look at and are in relation to what we call management override of control, and that's a presumed risk under auditing standards, and it's non-rebuttable. And as I think I've spoken to this committee before, what we do look at there is we take the stance of, well, if someone internally wished to manipulate the accounts, how would they go about doing that? And we've concluded that the primary risk that we need to address is management overriding the journals process, and that's how they will move money about between different accounts and conceal that. Make it clear that we're not anticipating or expecting that to happen, but that's the risk that we presume, and therefore we do our testing around that. And the final risk that we do need address under auditing standards is revenue recognition or fraudulent revenue recognition. But given the nature of the council's income, a lot through grant funding and then through fees and charges, which are relatively small but high volume, we believe we're able to rebut that risk. So in the original plan, we were looking at 3 significant risks that we needed to bring to your attention. In terms of conducting the audit, materiality, we set a materiality for the audit based upon expenditure in public sector. If you're in the commercial sector, it might be income. And we determined that to be £1.1 million for this year, which is a slight increase on last year, and is 1.95% of your prior year expenditure. And that's in line with the benchmark that we use as a firm. However, we do look at those elements where we believe there might be a greater interest to the readers of the accounts and need a lower level of precision. And in that, we've decided that we would wish to look at senior officer remuneration, and we set a lower materiality level of £25,000 for that. Elements we need to report to you as auditors. We need to report to you if we find any uncorrected omissions or misstatements, other than those that are clearly trivial. And our trivial level for this year is £55,000. So we report any of those matters that are over £55,000. So that's the overall approach that we were adopting as part of the audit plan. Clearly, at that time, COVID-19 and the pandemic had not hit, and as a result of COVID-19, however, there was an addendum to our plan. And I will come on to that in a moment. But what it has done primarily is to bring in a new significant risk for us and what we call at a financial statements level around COVID-19. And I will just address that in a moment. But as well as the accounts, I'm sure as members are aware, we do need to give also an opinion on value for money. And in relation to value for money, we've identified that the residual risk, having done an initial risk assessment, will be around the council's medium-term financial position and outturn, and therefore we focused on that for this year, which is similar to last year. And again, what I will do is pick up again how COVID-19 has impacted upon our considerations. I suppose in terms of audit logistics, whilst the dates are the same, I'm sure members are aware that in overall terms, the deadlines for production of the accounts this year have moved from the end of May for initial publication that has to be by the end of August, and then I suppose the audit deadline ultimately has to be by the end of November, although we are working to plans that are ahead of those in terms of when we will produce the audit, and James will follow that up as part of our progress report. In terms of independence, I'll come on to that to move us on in a moment, but yes, we do remain independent of the council. So that was sort of the high level audit plan, and I wouldn't plan unless we go into the details. Beyond that, if I do take members though to page 14 of the pack, which says other risks identified. We did identify at that point in time that IFRS 16, which is a new accounting standard in leases, was about to come in as a result of COVID-19 or in 2021, and therefore you need to do disclosures. That accounting standard has now been pushed back into 21-22. So that risk as itself, whilst is not in, we will not be addressing it in the same way. We still have a view as auditors that you will need to do some disclosures, but would not be to the same level that we would normally be expecting. when the accounts are produced, given that it will be coming in 21-22. The other thing I suppose in a way to bring to your attention is in terms of the audit plan. If I take you now to page 20, which is around audit fees, we had been in discussions with the council and yourselves as audit committees around the challenges for auditors and the quality agenda. And as part of that, we are proposing a fee variation for this year, which has been discussed with 151 officer and PSAA to address those increasing risks that we're seeing around all auditors, not just Grant Thornton, in terms of raising the bar. And as we already alluded to, those higher risk elements in the accounts of pensions and PPE. And there was an element of new developments around IFRS 16, which we've already done some work on, but clearly that may well need to be revisited. On the next page, on page 21, when I was mentioning our independence, that we do remain independent of you, I do need to draw to your attention that we do non-audit work for you, and that's in relation to your housing benefits grant claim and your return on capital receipts. We are satisfied, having gone for appropriate ethical considerations, that it's basically an extension of our audit work, and therefore we do remain independent of the council. So that was the main audit plan. If I quickly take you on then to page 26 in the pack, which is the addendum. As I've already mentioned, we did our plan back in February for the March meeting, and that was before the pandemic has hit. As a result of that, we have considered what the impact of that would be on our audit. In overall terms, if I take you on to the next page in terms of page 27 in the pack, which is a significant risk identified, what we've outlined there is, in terms of, from our perspective as your auditors, the key risks around COVID-19 are, one, the changing working arrangements and how that might impact upon you as a council to operate in an internal control environment. So that's a potential risk for us, although we are aware that the council has transitioned well to that, and we haven't noticed from our perspective to point any diminution in the control environment. And then I suppose what members, and I'm sure you're aware of this, where in terms of the general economy, where might COVID have impacted? Well, valuation of financial and property markets at the year end, and also looking further ahead in terms of value for money, which we'd already identified as a significant risk, is your issues around, or management around, looking at the medium-term financial strategy. And potentially one thing we will be looking at is going concern. We don't have an issue around the accounts being prepared on going concern basis as a public sector body, but we will be having those conversations with John Illingworth and the team around, are there any what we would consider to be material uncertainties or in relation to the financial position, whether disclosures might need to be made in the accounts. We'll be having that over the whole of the local government community, not just with yourselves. And in relation to those PP property, plant and equipment valuations, one area we'll be having conversations with is, we are aware that valuers, or some valuers, have been putting disclosures in their own valuations around material uncertainties where they're trying to value property at the end of March. And if those disclosures are made within those reports to yourselves, then normally we'd expect those to be reflected in the final financial statement. So again, we'll be discussing those with the finance team as and when the draft accounts are prepared. And that's where I was going to stop, Sarah. I'm sorry it's a bit longer than anticipated, but I think I've just tried to take you through everything, where we are and where we're up to speed now on the plan.
Okay, no, thank you, Grant. That was fine and very informative. Do any members of the committee have any questions for Grant?
Chair, Paul, just one thing, because when you look at all the items, when you go further down with COVID-19, Grant just mentioned, there's more work involved because you're remote and the officers might be working remotely as well. And I don't know whether there are certain things might involve you got to have face-to-face or not. Does that mean it will slow down the process and increase the fees later on because of the COVID-19? We don't know when it's going to finish.
Chair, I'll try to answer that. Yeah, I mean, I think we are working on our experience. We're currently in the middle of doing our National Health Service audits, and I think it is fair to say that whilst we have successfully transitioned, I think both to home working, I think we are tending to see that the auditing is taking longer. But having said that, I think we are trying to work within the current fee structure. But I can't guarantee. I might not have to come back and say it has taken longer. Some of the challenges we are having actually in terms of auditing standards are getting that evidence that we are seeing original documents or original prints from elements like that. So there is that challenge for us, and we are working with teams around using well, for us using Teams. There are clearly other systems available where people will show us what they're running at the same time. But we call it IPE, which is information provided by the entity. But that is one of the challenges that our regulator also is saying to us that we need to be aware of, certainly in these times. So we are looking to work within the fee envelope. But yes, we will keep you informed if we feel it is taking longer and the reasons for that. Because clearly, it's not. It's where those inefficiencies are achieved, by not having the purpose and stuff like that. We would normally come back to you. But it is taking slightly longer, but we are getting through our audits, and we're confident we'll hit the deadlines that we've agreed with you.
Okay, thanks, Grant.
Thank you, Ish. Thank you, Grant. Any other questions for Grant? Okay, Grant, I was just going to clarify. So the raising the bar issue. So is that's not specific to the council? That's a general issue.
That's a general one. I mean, that's in terms of the Financial Reporting Council giving feedback to all of the audit firms about being more sceptical and challenging in general around their audit. And a part of our response to that is we were already building elements in pre-COVID even around the work we would do on PPE and net pensions liability. But I think following, as a result of COVID, if you know what I mean, we will be looking at some of those year-end estimates, because I didn't go into too much detail there, but they will be looking to challenging, in a positive way, not yes. Looking for fault around some of those year-end debtors. Do you need bigger provisions around business rates, etc.? How have you accounted for that? The council itself actually has a number of investments, so in sort of one of its CCLA property funds and elements like that in its accounts. So there'll be more challenging around how you're valuing those at the year end. But the raising the bar one is a general one around us doing more, so increasing testing levels, being more sceptical. So that's a more general one, and that would have come in irrespective of COVID. Okay, thank you. And then there was just one other from me on the value for money in it. And I guess I'm just noting the observation that, notwithstanding COVID, there's a need for the council for us to find 3 million in savings anyway, and I guess that will only widen with the COVID issue. So I guess I'm just noting that's up in your report. We'd already identified clearly, I mean, and you're not alone in this in terms of, we're going through a period, or the sector's going through a period of austerity. There's been great uncertainty around business rates and the impact of that on councils. So we'd already identified that, as a council, that is one of the residual risks that we would need to look at. I think what the pandemic has done is thrown that even to, the ability for all councils to plan has become harder. Sure. However, I mean, our focus clearly will be on 2019-20, because it's the arrangements in that year. But yes, we will need to look, I suppose, a great scrutiny around how the council is reprofiling 2020-21 based upon what it knows. And what the government's approach is to support, if you know what I mean, going forward. Yes. But we will be looking at it in a bit more detail. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the recommendation is that the updated external audit plan and fee for 2019-20 be approved. So could I ask someone to propose that and someone to second it, please?
I'll propose that, Chair.
Thank you, Dave.
I will second it, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ish. Okay, so could you, in the first instance, vote for that recommendation, please? Chris, I think you'd like to hand.
Yeah.
Okay, Veronica, is that approach sufficient?
Bear with me a second.
Just looking myself.
Yeah, I'm just missing your hand there.
Yes. Okay, sorry everyone.
That's unanimous, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so we don't need to ask for votes against or abstain then, presumably.
No.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, let's move on to item 5, which is informing the audit risk assessment. So again, Grant, is this you or James?
James is going to take you through the next two, but I'll be online to help with
Okay.
questions if James can't answer them. So
Okay,
No
thank
worries.
you. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Grant, and thanks, Chair. For reference, I'm on page number 33 of the agenda pack, and the report, as mentioned, is titled Informing the Audit Risk Assessment. So the purpose of this report is set out on page number 36 of the agenda pack, and is essentially just to facilitate the two-way communication required under auditing standards between ourselves and the Audit and Ethics Committee as those charged with governance. It covers a number of key areas that we focus on as part of the planning and risk assessment phase of the audit, such as fraud, going concern, accounting estimates, and other routine inquiries that we make. The way in which the report is structured is that management have provided responses to a number of questions that we've posed. Although I don't propose to go through it page by page, it's quite a long report. I would ask members of the committee to just confirm that these responses are consistent with their understanding of the council. Similar to what Grant said around the audit plan, it should be noted that this was written at a point in time back in February, and therefore as part of the audit we'll be seeking to update our understanding of some of these areas that may have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. That is all I intended to say on this report, Chair, but happy to open it up to the floor for questions on informing the audit risk assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James. So any members of the committee wish to question or raise any clarification? So we're being asked to confirm that we recognise those statements and that we concur with those. So any questions for James along those lines?
I've got a question, Chair.
Okay, Craig, yes, please.
James, you alluded to it there that you'll be looking for update, and reading through the report, that was my question, really. Can you give us a little bit more detail on how this will be updated and the outcome of that?
I think whilst we wouldn't look to necessarily update the document specifically, some of the areas that I would draw out from that which will require an updated understanding are probably areas that Grant's already touched upon. So in particular, the going concern, whilst we don't anticipate that there'll be any material uncertainty over the going concern assumption, we will be adapting our review of that to understand how the council has taken into account the impact of COVID-19 in their future forecasts and assessment of the going concern. Similarly, accounting estimates are some of the biggest numbers in the accounts, the pensions figure, the valuation of property, plant and equipment, as well as other provisions and accruals, as Grant had already mentioned. We are expecting the COVID-19 pandemic will have some impact on that, and therefore we'll be factoring that into our detailed responses to those areas when we conduct the final accounts audit.
yeah, and Chair, it's Grant here. I think the only thing I would add to that would be clearly, the council's operating internally in a slightly different way. So I think what we bring to you probably on an exception basis, if we identified that whether the move to home working had caused any significant issues. So I think it'd be more of an exception basis. And of course, the other factor is, I think part of this does inform, in terms of the annual governance statement, we have a responsibility to read the annual governance statement and to be satisfied that it's consistent with our knowledge and understanding. So I suppose, and the annual governance statement goes all the way up to the time of our audit opinion, not just to the end of March. So I suppose in a way it'll be helping to inform our consideration of that as well.
Okay, thank you. Ish, a question for you?
Yeah, just on the last bit about the estimated regarding the pensions and property. I know there are rules set in how one calculates. I'm sure everybody does, how they amortize it. In terms of the rules, is it on the caution side, or is it, it's like I'm trying to say, is it hit and miss that we could get it wrong the wrong way, underestimating it?
Grant, did you want to talk
Want
to
me
that
to answer that one then?
pensions?
Well, I think there's two. There's pensions and there's I don't think it's a matter of the council getting it the wrong way. in terms of pensions, the normal process is that you will, through the pension fund, ask the actuary to give you an estimate in relation to what your net pension liability is. Now, depending on how the actuary goes about that, effectively, there's two sides of that equation. There's one, they estimate what the assets related to the council has, and it also estimates liabilities. I think one of the concerns we've got this year is how is the actual asset value. If the actuary has estimated what it might be at the end of March, the actual figure might be different. Now, I know that I think you are waiting on as late as possible to get it's called an IS 19 estimate, to make sure that the asset valuation is accurate as possible. Because what sometimes happens is the actuaries will look at December and project forward to March. If they've done that, then there's probably a higher risk that they may well have got that estimate wrong, given the way that markets moved. But I do know that you're waiting to see, hopefully, those March valuations come through. So it's not a matter of you getting it right or wrong. It's a matter of, are the assumptions reasonable? And I think on PPE, property, plant, equipment, and I've got to be careful how we use that terminology now. It's more along the lines of, you will be using an expert, and it depends on what assumptions they've been using and the type of property, to be honest. If you've got something that might be marketed, or we'd say existing use, well, was there an active market at the end of March? How did they go about doing the valuation? And if they were using indices, were they updated? So I think what we're saying is that the risk of those moving is greater, but we're hoping that actually as time goes on, then we might get a better picture about whether they're reasonable or not at the year end.
Okay, thank you.
Grant.
Thank you, Grant. Okay, no further questions for Grant or James on that, the informing the audit risk assessment? Okay, in that case, the recommendation that we're asked is that the committee to confirm that it is satisfied with the arrangements currently in place identified in the appended report. So if I could ask you to vote for that, please.
Sorry, Chair, you just need a proposer and a seconder in terms of the resolution.
Yeah, sorry, everyone. So could I ask someone to propose that, sorry, and someone to second it, please?
Yes, Chair. Ish Mystery was proposed.
Thank you, Ish.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Okay, so now could I ask you to vote in the first instance for that recommendation, please? Okay, that's unanimous, I believe, Veronica?
Yes, it is, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to item 6 on the agenda then, the audit progress report and sector update for 2019-20. Again, Grant and James, please.
Thank you, Chair. So our final paper is a brief progress report which brings members up to speed on our interim and planning work as we head towards the final accounts audit. If members could turn to page number 70 of the agenda pack titled Progress at May 20. In terms of our financial statements audit, we completed our final interim visit in March, albeit we did have to do this remotely. Page 74 of the pack gives further detail on the areas of work that we covered during this visit and the more general planning, which has been going on for longer than March. There are no issues I wish to bring to members' attention, other than to point out that a couple of areas will need to be revisited at the final account stage, as they had been intended to be carried out on site with auditors. As Grant has already noted, we completed our value for money risk assessment earlier this year and have identified a significant risk in relation to financial sustainability. We'll perform our detailed procedures to address this risk and report findings back to the committee in due course. We have revisited our risk assessment in relation to COVID-19, and while we haven't identified any additional significant value for money risks, we will keep abreast of this as we go through the audit. Just over the page on page number 71, we continue on the theme of other areas, and just note that we continue to liaise with John and the team on a periodic basis to support the council in preparing for the final accounts visit. And then finally on page number 72 of the agenda pack, we provide some further detail on how COVID-19 has impacted the audit, including remote working arrangements, key areas of the accounts that we've already discussed, and changes to regulations as Grant touched upon in the audit plan, namely the extended deadlines that we're now working to. The remainder of the report covers our usual sector updates for information of members. So I'll stop there, I think, and open the floor to questions again, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, any members of the committee, any questions for James? Clarifications? Ish and Chris, you've got your hands raised, but I think that's from the previous vote.
Sorry, Chair, that was from the previous, yeah,
No problem.
the technology. Sorry, I'm
No
okay, I'm happy.
Okay, thank you then, James. I was just going to again note one of the items in the sector update about the practice aid for audit committees, and I guess just to note that and to let you know that we'll meet as a committee and talk about how we use that aid and that tool to inform an assessment. Excellent, thank you, Chair. Okay, thank you. So the recommendation that we're asked is that the 2019-20 external audit interim progress report and sector update be noted. So could I ask someone to propose that, please, and someone to second it? Okay, thank you, John. Someone to second it, please.
Chair, I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so in the first instance, could I ask you to vote for that recommendation, please? Okay, so that, I believe, is unanimous again, Veronica?
Yes, it is, Chair.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, let's move on to item 7 of the agenda, which is the accounting policies update for 2019-20. And I'm presuming this is you, John Illingworth.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
So yeah, this is agenda item 7, which is, I think, page 86 of the agenda pack. And it's recommended that the committee approves the accounting policies for 2019-20. The detail of those is shown at Appendix 1 or page 91 of the pack. Again, following on from Grant's summary earlier on, we have published on the authority's website the changes to the public inspection period for the accounts and also the new publication dates. So the public will be aware of that. The accounting policies are the principles, bases and conventions, rules and practices applied in preparing the financial statements. And as the committee is responsible for approving the statement of accounts, it's important that you're aware of the basis in which they've been prepared. The code of practice hasn't materially changed from 2018-19. So there were nothing more than presentational changes and there are no material updates to the code of practice. I won't go through the policies in detail, but I'm happy to take any questions or clarifications that you may have on the information.
Okay, thank you, John. So John's told us that there are no material changes and they're just presentational issues to the policies that we've reviewed and accepted before. So on that basis, does anyone any questions for John or clarifications? Okay, thank you, John. In that case, the recommendation is that the committee approves the council's accounting policies for 2019-20. So again, could I ask someone to propose that, please?
Yeah, I'll move it, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ish, and someone to second that, please.
I will second that, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Dave. In that case, can you vote in the first instance if you're happy with that recommendation, please, for? Okay, thank you. I believe that's unanimous, Veronica.
Yes, it is, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Okay, let's move on to item 8, which is the Strategic Risk Register and Risk Management Update. And is this Chris Green, I believe?
Yes, it is. Thanks, Chair. This is Chris Green, Corporate Assurance and Improvement Manager, and I'm here to introduce the Strategic Risk Register and Risk Management Update report, which can be found at pages 103 to 120 in your agenda packs. The report sets out the recently updated Strategic Risk Register and an update on recent and planned risk management work. A full review of the Strategic Risk Register has been completed to align it with the Council's corporate strategy. The register sets out the risks related to delivering the various objectives in that strategy, the consequences the various controls and the planned actions. Each risk has been assessed by the senior management team with a likelihood and an impact rating using the assessment matrix set out in the Council's approved risk management strategy. Those which are assessed as high risk are highlighted as red in the appendix. The Strategic Risk Register was endorsed by the Council's Strategic Risk Management Group in February and is due to be reviewed again by the group at next week's Strategic Risk Management Group meeting. In the context of COVID-19 and the Council's response to the crisis, there's likely to be some changes to the risk register next week, with some impact on the delivery of objectives and, of course, the addition of a specific COVID-19 related risk. It's equally possible that some plans may need to be brought forward in that context. And I'd be happy to bring the register back to this committee at a later date. Can I refer members to the bottom of page 106 and the top of page 107 in your agenda packs, which updates you on our recent risk management work and the significant amount of work we've got planned for this financial year. Members are asked to consider and note the report and happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Does anyone have any questions for Chris on the Strategic Risk Register and the update? Okay, Ish.
Sorry, let me go back to the agenda. On page 107, 4.2, the plan work Chris just referred to, which will be included next year, this year and the next year. On the first bullet point, and it's back to because of COVID, it just wants to know when it says the way we manage, the training and sharing example, good practice, because people are working remote, will this be done online by somebody?
Yes, thank you. I think that will depend on how things pan out over the coming weeks and months. If it looks as though we can't return to the previous business as usual, then we'll be looking at this training and seeking to deliver it online. And at the moment, that's something that the HR team are exploring. We certainly wouldn't want our training plans to be on hold indefinitely, but it's a case of, at the moment, seeing how things are panning out.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. John Hillingworth, do you have a question?
Sorry, just to raise the committee that we are doing some way we manage sessions electronically, and there's one tomorrow actually, and I'm involved in it. So we are doing it through MS Teams.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, any other questions for Chris on that paper? John Eves, thank you. John Eves, are you there? You've raised your hand.
Sorry, yes. Just to reinforce the point that Chris made about the importance of bringing the revised register back to the committee as soon as it has been looked at, because I think we do need to be aware how COVID is being brought into the strategic register.
Yes, sure. Thank you, John. Chris, I was just going to a couple of observations. So the list of planned work on page 107 of our pack, section 4.2 of your report is, there's quite, I know there's only a reasonably small number of bullet points there, but there's actually quite a lot of work within those bullet points, isn't there? So I guess the question is, is that achievable?
Thanks, Chair. And yes, I think the important thing to point out is that some of those bullet points relate to our internal audit plan. So the delivery of internal audit assurance work in relation to key controls, that forms part of the audit plan. As do some of the other work that we've got planned around procedural reviews. But the team that will deliver this work, the Corporate Assurance and Improvement team, around half of the team in terms of full-time equivalents are deployed on internal audit work, with the rest of the team deployed on other activities that the team undertakes. So to answer your question, yes, as we speak, I'm confident that we have the resources in place to undertake that work.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. And there was just a second question. So in the risks and the action plans that follow in your report, a number of those actions from the top 5 risks, I think it is, isn't it? The top 5 red risks are quite a way into the future. So they're December, January, even perhaps March next year, I think. So given that they're the top risks that you've identified, is it appropriate that we're leaving them until then to do that, or is that because they're such meaty issues that actually that's the realistic timescale?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, they are very meaty areas and actually may go beyond March next year. But the reason for setting that March date is because there are actually lots of strands that sit beneath a lot of those actions, lots of individual project strands which are managed on an ongoing basis. But again, because the register is due to be reviewed next week, we'll be looking at those timescales again and updating on some of those sub-projects and actions that sit beneath that. This is obviously a top-level document. And because it's likely to the delivery of some of the strategic actions are likely to go on certainly beyond the end of the current financial year. We've put that review date in there again, so it keeps the attention on delivery of those various strategies and projects.
Okay, no, thank you. That makes sense. Okay, if there's no other questions for Chris, then the recommendation is that the report be considered and noted. So could I ask for someone to propose that and someone to second that, please?
Go on, Chair. I will propose again.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, in that case, can you in the first instance vote for that recommendation, please? Okay, and that is also unanimous, I believe, Veronica?
Yes, it is, Chair.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, let's move on then to item 9, which is the internal audit plan and update for 2020-21. So, Chris, is this you again?
It is, yes, thanks, Chair. So this report can be found at pages 121 through to 165 in your agenda packs and covers both the internal audit plan for 2020-21 and an update on our activity. So I'll cover the internal audit plan first and then the update. The approach to developing the audit plan was agreed at the last meeting in January. However, whilst the original intention was to split the audit plan into 2, that's no longer considered practical given the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our work plans. Proportionately more of the audit plan will need to be delivered in the second half of the year. Other than that, the approach has been followed as set out to the committee at the last meeting. The draft plan is enclosed with the report for consideration at Appendix A, which is pages 128 to 136 in your packs. Members won't be surprised to hear this plan isn't quite the same as that initially proposed before the cancelled March meeting. We needed to amend it to include specifically quite a lot of business grant assurance work. That's both for the mandatory scheme that's been implemented and the discretionary scheme that's about to be implemented, and also the review of the control environment related to changes due to COVID-19 and a review of operational procedures. We've reviewed the level of resources required, and my opinion is that these are sufficient, notwithstanding the update, which I'll move on to shortly. The IT audits will continue to be delivered by an external provider. In addition to the audit plan, the report also includes the long list potential audits, Appendix B, which is pages 137 through to 165 in the agenda pack, and that includes a risk assessment of each area and the basis for including or excluding audits from the plan. Arrangements for approving ongoing changes to the plan will continue as previously agreed by the committee. Given that the March meeting was cancelled, the Chair and Vice Chair, in consultation with the Executive Director, agreed that this year's internal audit work could commence. Moving on to the update on internal audit work and resources, there's obviously a lot of uncertainty at the moment and going forward. But as we stand, delivery of internal audit work is continuing as far as possible remotely. We might start to find difficulties where there are complex processes, for example, that we're trying to audit. But we are making great use of MS Teams to hold meetings online. There is a function within there that screens can be shared, which our staff are able to use. However, there may still be those complex processes that are more difficult to evaluate. And we may be able to have socially distant meetings as part of our return to work arrangements as we move forward. One member of the team has been redeployed. And again, in my planning and resource assumptions, I've made the assumption that this will be to the end of August. No other redeployments at the moment, although of course that could potentially change. And equally, my planning assumption of that person being redeployed to the end of August could be incorrect. If the person comes back to us sooner, then great. If it's later, then there would be a further impact on the audit plan. The team's work has been refocused during this time. There's been an increase in risk management support. I've already mentioned the business grant assurance work, the redeployment I've mentioned, and there's also been some work to support the HR team. I'd like to just make a minor point, but I think this is right to highlight that the business grant assurance work we commenced was commenced not fully in line with the public sector audit standards. The decision was taken, and I think it was the right one, that we needed to respond to the situation. A new system and a new process needed to be made up and running in a very short period of time in order to get grant payments out to businesses who needed them, and we wanted to put in place a prepayment assurance framework, which we've done. And I think, just to stress as well, that there has been an Institute of Internal Audit paper circulated in the last week, which has highlighted that and recognises that there may well be instances of non-compliance with the standards this year, but it reiterates that the overarching mission of internal audit is to add value through its assurance and consultancy services, and that takes precedence over the nitty-gritty of some of the standards. With all of those things taken together in the round, I currently expect to deliver a more than adequate internal audit plan, but that's obviously, that statement is quite heavily caveated. We haven't been following up on internal audit recommendations over the last couple of months, so we took the decision to lapse that work in the nature of the COVID-19 response. We figured that perhaps wouldn't be towards the top of many managers' agenda at the moment, but we will be reinstating that work over the next week, and I plan to bring a full progress update to the next meeting in July. But just by way of heads up, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a reduction in our performance in that area. Members are asked to consider whether you wish to see any further changes to the internal audit plan, and subject to that, to approve the audit plan for 2020-21. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Any questions from members to Chris on the internal audit plan and update for 2021? Dave Cranham.
Thank you, Chair. I was a bit concerned that there seems to be, under the current circumstances, rather a lot of work on that plan. Are we confident that we will be able to do it comprehensively?
Chris?
Thank you, Councillor. As we stand, yes, and we will not put in place any changes to the quality of work whatsoever. But there are lots of caveats, as I say, and we may find that when we get into the nitty-gritty that we reach dead ends with some audits, and it's possible that we may have to conclude audits and issue reports without fully covering the scope. But if that's the case, we will make that clear in our reports, and we'll make it clear to the committee. And really, it's as we speak. So the situation as we speak is that we have sufficient resources to deliver that plan. It's all been carefully considered. We always consider, for example, sickness, holiday, training time, development time, admin time, all of those things. But you're quite right, audits may take longer to deliver to the quality that's required. And I'll keep abreast of that and keep the committee informed. One other thing I'd also stress is that there is a contingency in that plan. It's not a high contingency, it's 20 days, it's just under 5%, but it does give us a little bit of additional flexibility. And I think one other comment is that realistically, in such a fast moving, changing situation, it's likely that audits will need to be moved around during the course of the year to ensure that the team and the service continues to respond and deliver work which is closely aligned with the council's priorities and risks.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Craig, you have a question?
Yeah, I think, Chris, you probably covered some of this, but I'd still like to ask, is there any risk that your audits won't be as effective, being having to be conducted virtually or with social distancing, etc.?
Thanks, Councillor. I think that's possible, and that's certainly a risk that we would be managing as a team. The frank answer at the moment is we really don't know. We're going to try and deliver our audits in full, in the normal way, albeit with the work largely being conducted online. As I mentioned earlier, there is that possibility or probability that we'll be able to conduct socially distant meetings at some point in the not too distant future. All I can really say is it will keep management and the committee fully informed. If there are any areas where we can't provide assurance, then we'll make that clear in our reports, and whatever the implications are, they'll be made clear as well on an ongoing basis.
Okay, any other questions for Chris? Okay, Chris specifically asks us, or the report asks us, if there's any additional work that the committee would identify to add to the internal audit plan. So I guess, so I'm assuming that given that none of us have raised anything, we're content with the audit plan as it stands, with the caveats that Chris has explained to us. I'll take silence as affirmation with that.
Yes, Chair.
Can I just make one point, please?
Yes, sure, Craig.
I was just wondering about the rationale for leaving off the climate change audit. I know it says there that it's too early for there to be a lot of progress with that. Would it be helpful for that to be included to give the council more of a benchmark as to where we are?
Thanks, Councillor. I'm happy to consider that if the committee would wish to see that. Perhaps it would be more of a sort of advisory or confirmatory review rather than an assurance assignment per se. But I'm happy to follow the committee's wishes. It would mean that a piece of work would need to come out of the plan. So I'd probably just need to take forward some conversations internally as to which particular assignment that would be.
I'm not particularly advocating taking something out or saying that it would be useful, just a consideration whether it should be benchmarked and to give us an idea of where we are and the progress next year as the full audit goes in. But again, it's maybe not worth sacrificing another piece of work for. I don't know what other members' views are.
Have other members got views on that? John Eves?
I think that given that the stress that the team is under already, and I think I'm agreeing with the last speaker, that I think we shouldn't be taking out assurance work at this stage for an audit of this nature. It just slightly concern me to lose some of the assurance work. Well, I do appreciate the importance of the piece of work that's being discussed.
Okay, thank you, John. Councillor Cranham.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have the same concerns. In my previous comment, I was a little bit worried that given the conditions that we're under today and how they change almost daily, that the officers might actually be a bit short of time. So my opinion is we should really leave things as they are until conditions improve.
Okay, thank you for that comment, Dave. Chris Green, can you come back to us?
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to suggest that we could take forward Councillor McQueen's query internally, and it may be possible to have a report from management on that, setting out the current position, and then to use that as a benchmark for a future audit, which would be likely to be scheduled in the next financial year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McQueen, are you happy with that as a proposal?
Yeah, that sounds sensible. I agree with the comments of the other members. It's certainly not worth taking out an insurance piece of work to put a benchmark in place. But if we could get a report from management, that would be great.
Okay, thank you then, everyone. That seems a solution. So notwithstanding that comment, we're not proposing any changes to the internal audit plan. John Eves and Chris Green, you've both got your hands up. Are they hands from before, or are they? Oh, okay.
Apologies, Chair.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I was just checking in case you wanted to come back in. Okay. In that case, the recommendation is that we consider that any additional work for inclusion in the internal audit plan be identified, and that secondly, that subject to the above, we approve the internal audit plan for 2021. So could I ask for a proposer and then a seconder on that recommendation, please?
Yeah, I'll propose that.
Thank you, Chris.
I'll second that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, so could I ask you to vote for that recommendation in the first instance, please?
Someone's missing.
It's me. My bar's not coming up. Sorry.
Just put it to the screen. It'll come.
Yeah.
You should do.
Oh, I've got it.
We'll accept it.
Sorry about that. Okay, so that's unanimous then. So thank you everyone for that. Okay, let's move on to item 10, which is the annual report of the Corporate Assurance and Improvement Manager. Chris Green, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is my annual report, and it can be found at pages 166 to 204 in your agenda packs. I'm not proposing to go through the report in detail because there is a lot of content, and some of that content has been previously presented to the committee during the course of the year. I'll just highlight the key messages. Under the accounts and audit regulations and the public sector internal audit standards, I'm required to provide an annual internal audit opinion and report which can be used to inform the annual governance statement. My overall opinion for 2019-20 is that substantial assurance can be given that there is an adequate and effective governance, risk and control framework in place designed to meet the Council's objectives. This is the second highest of 4 possible ratings. Some areas do require attention, but there are plans in place to address those. The full report is set out at Appendix A on pages 172 to 197 in your packs. And the key points are that 79% of audits resulted in either high or substantial level of assurance. In total, 89% of recommendations were implemented. There were 15 overdue actions at the end of March, None of those were high risk, 5 were medium risk, and the rest were low risk. And as I mentioned under the previous agenda item, a full update will be provided to the committee at the July meeting. There were 3 audits which resulted in only limited assurance. I'm satisfied with the management response to those audits. However, our work highlighted that the council wasn't fully complying with the requirements of the Local Government Transparency Code. And whilst the issues are being addressed, this will be referred to in the annual governance statement. The report includes a summary of the findings of each audit, although many of these were previously reported. The report also includes numerous examples of how the Internal Audit Service has added value for the Council beyond the core assurance work, and includes service performance data with comparisons with previous years. In relation to the public sector internal audit standards, my conclusion is that we continue to operate in general conformance to those standards. I can also reconfirm that the service operates independently and objectively. Finally, I can confirm that the requirements of the Quality Assurance and Improvement Plan, of the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme, continue to be met, and a copy of that is included with the report at Appendix B on pages 198 to 204. Members are asked to consider and note the report, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris on his annual report? Okay, no questions then. So, Chris, I just wanted to thank you for the report. I thought it was very comprehensive and very informative, and very consequently very easy to read. I guess as a committee we note the substantial assurance and the positive nature of that assurance based on the work and the coverage that you undertook last year. So I only had one question other than those observations, and that was, is there any, should we be concerned about the 15 overdue recommendations? So I appreciate that you haven't followed them up subsequently post-COVID, but is there anything there that's keeping you awake at night?
No, there isn't, Chair. They are 5 medium risk actions, and I can't actually recall at this time exactly what the nature of those were, but the 5 medium risk, I'm not particularly concerned, and I can confirm that in all cases that management are progressing with the various actions, albeit in this case with the action being delayed.
Sure. Okay, no, thank you for that. Okay, in the absence of any further questions, then the recommendation is that the report be considered and noted. So could I ask for someone to propose and then subsequently for someone to second that, please?
Yeah, I'll move, Chair. It be noted.
I'll second it, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Also, can I ask you to vote for that recommendation in the first instance? Okay, that's unanimous. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chris, for your report. Okay, so item 11 on the agenda is a motion to exclude the public under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972. So we like to consider passing the following resolution, that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of information defined in paragraphs 1, 2 and 3 of Schedule 12A of the Act. Could I ask for someone to propose that motion, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll move, Chair. Can I just say before somebody seconded, it's the first time it's come up on the blue paper. Is that stopped on the streaming now? Once we second and agree. This is not for public consumption.
Yeah, shall I just come in here, Chair, just to clarify?
Please.
Yeah, no problem. So Ish, once the motion has passed, then the streaming will stop, and IT will confirm that.
Okay.
And that will effectively exclude the public from the meeting.
Okay. I'm only highlighting aloud. I think I know that. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem, Ish.
Okay. I move the motion, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Ish. And a seconder.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, so could I ask you to vote for that recommendation then, please? Okay, I believe that's unanimous, Veronica.
Yes, it is, Chair.
Okay, in that case, could I ask IT to cease the streaming of our meeting, please, and notify me when that's happened.